Welcome my friends on the internet to today's Next.js tutorial where we're going to learn Next.js by building a full stack application with Tailwind, Firebase, Next.js, and some other cool little features here and there that's just going to make a great learning experience for anyone who isn't really too familiar with Next.js. We're going to be looking at like APIs and how you can fetch them into your front end and all the kind of specificities that come with it. So it's going to be a great tutorial. If you enjoy it, please like and subscribe, super appreciate it. And let's first start off by looking at a demo of what we'll be building today. So for this tutorial, we're going to be building a super nice and neat and responsive to-do list app. For all the data persistence, it's going to be in Firestore, and the CRUD functionality, you can swap it for anything that you like. So we've got a neat little login screen, or you can register, and if you submit, you get nothing. Let's say we register an account, which is monkey@live.com, put in a password, submit. It logs us in. We get a nice little menu where you can log out, and in here we could add a to-do, which is like buy groceries or whatever. Add that, it pops up here, go for a run. Once again, it all looks great on mobile, and we could edit a to-do. So, don't forget apples, save that, and let's say we deleted this one and then refresh the page, and all of our to-dos get pulled back in. So it's a pretty great application. We've got some nice little icons here. It's super responsive and everything. Let's get into it. Cool, so that all looks good. Now let's see how we build it. And we're going to start that process by coming into our terminal. And here I'm just into my documents. So the first thing we'll do is cd into our project folder, so GitHub. And I'm going to type the command npx create next app. And I'm going to call it Next.js to-do app. Now, to-do apps are great because if we just type enter, we can go yes. And that's going to build our Next.js app. Now, to-do apps are great because they teach you all of the fundamentals of like CRUD implementation and how you can work that into your system. So once you finish this project, I'd highly recommend you adapt it into something that you want, add it to your portfolio project or whatever you like. But yeah, should be dope. Cool. So now that that is all installed, we're going to cd into that file. So that's Next.js to do. And in here, the first thing we're going to do is install Tailwind for a design library. And for that, we're going to type npm install -d Tailwind CSS, post CSS, and auto prefixer. And once we've done that command, we're going to type npx tailwind CSS init-p. That's going to make us a nice little file. And now I'm going to type code to open up my code editor. Now the link to the GitHub repository for this code is in the description, so check that out if you want. But now that we've opened it up, we are first just going to come into this Tailwind config file that we just made. And I'm going to swap out content here for this code just there. So now we can save that. And the last thing we have to do is come into this file just here, and we can remove all of this code. And we want to copy in these 3 lines just here. And for this particular tutorial, we're not going to need any of this information in home.module.css, so we can just delete that file. Cool. So now we've initialized Tailwind and we're good to start building our project. But the first thing we're going to do is actually just take a look at what Next.js provides us with. So in here, we have a package.json file, which is just standard for all React projects. We have a README, and then I get ignore some not so significant files. Don't really have to do anything with these. But the 3 folders that are significant are the pages directory, the public directory, and the styles. So Next.js works by using this pages layout as like your folder directory full of all your pages. And so when you navigate to a different URL or a different suffix or a different route from your website, it will navigate to the relevant directory in here. So we'll look at that a bit more later. And so essentially the entry point for our whole app is in this app.js file. And from here, everything kind of gets rendered within. And so we can come into our terminal, and if we just start this up, npm run develop, we can see that it starts up a server here on localhost 3000 for us. And if I just move that to the side, just like that, nice and neat, we can see that we're getting an issue, and that's just because of the home module file that I removed. And so if we just kind of remove that for a second, then we get none of this, and that's all good. But we actually don't need any of this content, so we can come in here and just gut everything. Cool, so now if I refresh that page, we still get an issue, and that's because styles is not defined, and so we just have to remove that from this just here. And so now when I refresh the page, we get it totally blank. We have this entry point which we don't have to touch, but essentially the actual content that gets rendered within that entry point is within this index file here. So if I type James, James pops up on the screen. And so this is going to be the folder where we start typing out all of our subcomponentry and stuff like that. Now, if I wanted to add a new file, and let's just call it henry.javascript, and we can use RFC to render out Henry, we can see how this pages directory works by going Henry. And now we can see that this component here gets rendered. And so if I change that to James, that will fully refresh that page just like that. So it's absolutely magic. Equally, if I wanted a folder called subfolder, I could make that. And in here, I could have a new file called index.js. RFC that. So I'm going to say that this is the subfolder page. You want to make sure that all of your index pages have capitals. And in here, we can just say this is the index page. And so if we go to subfolder, we can see that this component gets rendered. And then if I had a new file in here called banana.javascript, RFC that, banana, just change that to an uppercase. Well, actually, more specifically, a good practice I like to do is banana page for all pages that will say banana. And so now I can come into subfolder /banana, and banana gets rendered because it's within subfolder. So you can kind of see how that routing works with these pages. But anyway, we actually don't need any of this, so I'm just going to delete it for the second, and we'll see how it works a bit more later. For the minute, we're just going to come back into localhost 3000, and we render out James. Now, we have a couple of things to set up afterwards. We're going to start off with a components folder. So in our components, we're going to need one called login.javascript. So I'm just going to make that. So in here, what I would probably do is just say render login, right? Just like that. And so now we can auto import that. That shows up at the top. And now login is rendered, and we have our first component rendering within our page, and we can kind of see how we would build a login form to our to-do app. Now for this project, I want to use some Google fonts. And so we are going to come into Google Fonts for a second. And so the fonts that we're going to be using for this particular project is Montserrat. And so if we just click on this font, we can add a few styles in. So just like that. Pretty simple. We're going to take all of the bold ones, none of the italicized fonts. And we can copy this link tag here to import it into our folder, to import it into our application. But the one thing we're going to have to add, if we want to add links into our document, we come into our pages and we create a new file called _document.javascript. And so this is just a Next.js specific component, and it has a very particular format. But essentially what it's going to do, I'm just going to copy it in, is as much as we might have head tags in here, they're only for these essential other tags or links. If we want to add other links, we have to use this document component and add them into here. And so in this particular case, what I'm going to do is copy all of these link tags just into the head of this document here, and that should work nicely. Now we're going to have to just quickly close some of these tags like that. I have to do this top one. So now that should be all happy. And the other thing we're going to have to do is change cross origin just there to this. And so now that should compile correctly. And we can, in this particular case, apply that font family to our entire document by coming into our global CSS, and in here we can just select everything and apply that font family just like that. So that's nice and easy. And now if I come back into my document, we can see that Montserrat font is indeed applied. So that's cool. So now we have fonts configured into our document. The last thing we're going to use is FontAwesome icons. So in here, if we just type in FontAwesome icons CDN, we can select this top package here. It's version 6.1.1 for me. And once again, come back into this document file and copy in that additional link tag just like that. Update any of these comments here. So it says no referrer policy, and we'll probably also have to change the cross origin. But the cool thing about that is that now we're going to be able to use FontAwesome icons and just say dragon, for example. And so now we can copy this dragon, we can paste it in here underneath our login form. And now if we come back into our document, we can see that we do indeed get that little dragon rendering. So that's super neat. One other thing to note in Next.js is that class is a reserved word, so when you are using these icons, you will just have to update it to say class name, but that's pretty straightforward. So now that we've finished most of the configuration and the imports for our project, the next thing we're going to do is come into our components document and make a layout.javascript component. And so in here, we're just going to do RFC to create that component. And essentially how this component is going to work is it's going to receive props. And in here, we're just going to destructure children, so if I can spell it correctly, out from props. And inside of this div here, this is where we're going to initialize our page layout. And so essentially what that's going to be is we're going to have our children being rendered out here, but this overarching component, we're just going to say class name is equal to flex and flex column. This is all Tailwind styling. We're going to say min height of the screen. We're going to give it a position of relative, just like that. And now we can see if that's working by just changing the background to a background of Slate 900. And now obviously nothing changes because we haven't rendered this component anywhere. But if I come back into our app, we can wrap this component just in here with our layout. Enter that down onto a new line and paste that down below. Oops. That should actually say layout, just like that. And now we can see that our whole screen goes the color we would expect it to go, which is perfect. So now we have our layout wrapping our entire document. So that's super neat. So logically, the next thing to do would probably be to make header and footer components. So in here, I'm just going to say footer.javascript, RFC and RFC, just like that. And so for the moment, I'm just going to say, this one's going to, just say header. And I'm going to give it a class name of fixed. We're going to say top of 0. Width is going to be full, left is 0. Background is just going to be green 300 for the moment so that we can see that working. And for our footer, we actually don't have to do too much, because what we can do is if we come into our layout component, we can render out our header just here, have that auto import. And now we can have a main component and render our children within that main component. And we can give this a class of flex1. And so what that means is that this component is going to occupy most of the space. And we can see that working if I type background yellow 300. It takes up all that space, so that's super cool. And naturally, that will just push our footer component to sit always at the bottom. And so we can see it just down there. And so now we have a nice, neat, responsive layout. And as we fill out our component, our header will stay fixed, so it's going to be excellent. And so with that all done, the first thing we're actually going to start styling out is our header. But I actually just quickly decided that I would prefer to change the font real quick. So what I'm just going to do is quickly click on that one, remove all of this, and instead I'm just going to take this just font because I think it just looks slightly cooler. So if we just grab all these styles, just like that, refresh the page so that little thing comes up, we can swap out those link tags that we just had before really quickly. So it's just going to be these three here, just like that. And once again, we'll just have to make sure that we close all of these and update this term just here. So now we can save that, and then we will just have to come back into our style sheet and just swap that font over just like that. Cool, so that's all done. Once again, we are working on our header. So if we come back into our header, here what we're going to do is we're going to just call it, we're going to just make an h1 tag called to-do list, just like that. Now obviously the text is quite dark, so in this component just up here, since we're having a dark theme, I'm actually just going to say text white, and so that should change everything just like that. And now in our header we can remove that background just like that, so that is all good, and we can see that that is overlapping like that. But if we change this from fixed to sticky, we can see that now it will push it below and it will still stick to the top, so that's super good. From there what we're going to do is we're going to give this a class of text 3XL, so that should be a little bit bigger. And we're quickly just going to start off by designing for a mobile, and then later what we'll do is we'll move up to a full screen device. And so just here we can see that that's actually not too bad, considering that we're going to have a profile icon over the other side. And so when we go to a larger screen, I can add that breakpoint by just saying small. And in Tailwind, it's way easier to go from small to big. And so I'm just going to say, when we go bigger than a small screen, I want the text to be like 6XL. And so how that's going to work is it'll be that size. And then when we come onto a bigger screen, it gets way larger, which is, you know, just what we're looking for. So now that we've added that in, the next thing we're going to do is add a profile icon. And so for that, we're just going to say flex items center justify between, and have a padding of 4 all around. So if I save that, that will push the to-do list in a little bit, and we can come in here and just say profile. And we can just take this user icon just like that and paste it just below, just here, swap out class for class name. And now we can see that we have that little user icon showing up on the other side, which is just what we want. If anything, we could probably just make the padding X a little bit bigger. So we can say padding X is maybe 6, push it inwards a bit. And once again, when it comes to a bigger screen, we're going to want to upgrade these sizes, because currently only the text is working. And so we can actually achieve that effect by copying that from there and pasting it in here. Although that's actually much too large, so maybe I will keep them independent. And to do that, we'll just add the classes in here. So I'm going to say text extra large and small, maybe text 3XL. Which 3, just like that. So that's a bit smaller there and a bit bigger there. So that's beautiful. The last thing we could probably just do is say background of slate 900, because otherwise when we scroll, we'll be able to see things behind it. So we can equally just say background inherit. And lastly, we're just going to say border bottom. Border is going to be solid, and we're going to have a border of white. And so that would just put a nice little white border underneath the top of our page. So that actually looks fairly reasonable. We can continue to build on that. So if I just bring this down to the side, yeah, that'll do. currently we can select all of this. So in this particular font, what I'm just going to say is select none so that we can't get that select effect. And this icon is going to be interacting. So for it, what we're going to have to do is add some hover effects. So we're going to say duration 300 so that all transition effects take 300 milliseconds. So it's not an instantaneous transition. And we're just going to say hover opacity 40. So now we can see that when I hover, it goes dark. And the last thing we'd probably want to add is just a cursor pointer. So that's just going to be a nice little profile icon for us later. So the next thing we're going to have to do for our to-do list is do our login screen. And so that's going to be relatively straightforward. And here what we're just going to do is add flex and flex column for our main display and also give it a padding of 4. And I might actually just try keep that consistent with the header. So I might just remove that padding X of 6. So that everything lines up nicely. And now I'm going to come back into our login screen, remove our document. And so now in here where we're rendering out our login, I'm actually just going to remove these to set them back to fragments so that our main is the primary container for that. And what that means is that we can come into our login component, and in here we can just say it's going to have a class name of flex1. And so now if I said background green 300, it will once again occupy all of that space. So that's super neat. So in here we can say flex, flex column, justify center, items center so that everything is centered. And this is where we're going to have our login form. So obviously the first thing we're going to need is an h1 tag, and so that is going to say login. And so we can see that pop up just down there. Now for that we're just going to say font is extra bold, and we're also going to say that the text on this page is going to be small, but on a small or bigger screen the text is going to be, actually we'll make that small, we'll make this extra small, just like that. Now for this we can change the login so that it sizes up. So that just sets a default for everything else, but for this login we'll make it bigger. So we're going to say text 2XL. So that looks pretty good. And then on a smaller or bigger screen we can say maybe text 4XL. So just like that. So once again when I come out bigger, it's just going to grow a bit larger. So that is good. Beneath that, well actually first I should probably just get rid of that background color because we don't really need it. We have login. Next, what we're going to do is have an input. The type is going to be text, just like that. And so that's going to show up here. And now for that, we're going to give it a class of outline none, because currently what you'll notice is that if I click on it, it gets a weird outline. And so now when I click on it, we don't get that weird outline. We're also going to have to say text is slate 900. So that we can actually see it. We're going to say padding, let's just see what padding 2 looks like. Honestly, that doesn't even look too bad. I think what I'm also going to do is just say width is full so that it occupies the full width, but I'm going to say max width is maybe 30 characters, just like that, so we can set a maximum width. So now what will happen is as we expand the screen, it's going to reach a maximum width of 30 characters. We can see that that would change if I went 65, it would grow way bigger, but we don't need that. So 30 characters, just like that. And then we're also going to set a placeholder is equal to email address. So now I can remove that and we have email address just there. I might just capitalize that and remove these bullet points. So that's a nice little component. We're also just going to have one for password just in here. So I can change this to say password. And for our flex container, I can say a gap of 4, and on a smaller or bigger page, I can have a gap of maybe 8. And so now when we are on a big page, that's probably too much, to be honest. So 4 looks actually pretty reasonable. And then if we come down, we could possibly even make that like 2 on small screens and gap 4 on a bigger screen. So that looks pretty good for a login screen, to be honest. Once again, for this H1, I'm just going to say select none, because I really don't like being able to select that text. And the last thing I'm just going to do is just set a duration to 300, because we just want to add some focus effects for when they focus on the login screen. So in here, what I'm going to do is say border bottom, border solid, border white, but on focus, I want the border to be cyan 300. And so what that should do is we can see that when I focus, we get a little border, but we can actually make that a bit thicker. So I could say 2. So now you can really see it, that when we select it, we get that little border down the bottom, which is kind of neat. And we will consequently just want to copy that to this bottom component just here. Just like that, magic. So now depending on which one you select on, you get that tiny little bottom border effect. And so finally, we're going to have a button. And so this is going to have a class name of width full max width 30 characters to keep it consistent with the others. We're going to say border is going to be 1 pixel white and border solid. Just like that. And so in here we can just say submit. And instead of doing that, we could just do uppercase, for example. That would work too. So now we have a cute little submit button. We also just want to add a PY of maybe 1. Honestly, you could possibly make that 2. And so now we just have a really cute little login screen that looks actually pretty dope. I might, however, just change this from 30 to 40 so that we get a tiny bit more width. Magic, and now we have a good looking login screen. Obviously the one thing we're going to need is that this button needs to be more interactive. So for that, what we're going to do is once again say duration 300. We're also going to say relative, and in here we're going to add an after effect. So after is going to have a position of absolute, after is going to have a top of 0, after is going to have a right of full, which is like 100% pushing away from the right. We're also going to say after is going to be background white, after Z10, after width is going to be full, and after height is also going to be full. And so how this is going to work is that when we do this, we can see it out here. So we're just going to have to set overflow hidden on the main component. But now what we can do is we can say on hover, we want after to minus translate x full. And that didn't work because I was pushing it the other direction. But we can see that now that it comes in, but it can't really see it because it's happening too quickly. So if we just add an after duration 300 to that, we can see that now we get that nice little slider. However, submit is gone, and we can fix that just by putting the submit inside of an H2, giving that a class name of relative and a Z of 20. And in here, on hover, we can also just change the text color. So the text is going to have to be slate 900. And so if I just wrap that submit inside of this H2 like that, now when I swap, we can see that the submit stays the same, and we just get that super neat little hover effect that looks excellent. So if I may toot my own horn, I actually think it's a pretty cool little login screen. Obviously the next thing we're going to have to do is actually wire it up, but I can't stop playing with that button. But essentially now to wire it up, what we're going to need is some state. So in here, I'm just going to import use state from React, and now inside of my component here, I can just say const email set email is equal to use state, and we're just going to have an empty string. And I can do the exact same thing for password and do the same thing here, password. And now in these inputs, what we can do is we can set the value is equal to password for the password, and we can say on change is equal to pass a function, take the event, and just say set password equal to e.target.value. And likewise, we will want to do the exact same thing for this one just here. The last thing we want to do is just change this to a password so that when we type it, it goes like that, which is cool. We can actually see that it's changing the top one because I haven't switched the logic over, but this will be set email. Sorry, wrong way around. This will be email and set email. So now all of those states are working nicely. The next thing we're going to do is just say function submit handler, just like this. And in here, we're just going to say if not email or not password, return, so nothing happens. But equally, what we could even do is just add a little error statement in, so we could add some error logic in here. So we could just say error and set error, and that can just be null for the minute. And just underneath the login screen, we could have a div that just displays the error like that. But we can conditionally render it. So if we just wrap it, we can say if error is true, and that then render this particular component. And so in here, we can say never. But basically what we're doing here is instead of just having this return statement, we can set some state. So we could say set error, please enter username and password. We'll change that to email. And so now what we can do is just quickly make this look a little bit pretty by just saying, once again, class width full, max width is going to be 40 characters, border rows for 300, I think. We'll go text rows 300, padding y of 2. And so now if we have nothing in here and nothing in here, and I click submit, nothing happens, and that's because we have to wire up this button. So we just have to say on click is equal to handle submit handler. And now when I click here, we can see that we get this little text showing up. However, it doesn't have the border showing up, and that's because we have to just add the rest of the border settings. So border and border solid. So border just sets the thickness, but now that that works, it's all good. We can also just say text center. And the last thing I'm going to do is change that to a 400 just so it's a little bit more intense. So just like that. Please enter username and password. So that will only appear if they enter it incorrectly. Cool. So that's all good. The actual one other thing that we might want to just enter is an H2 just here. And this just says login. If login is true, then it's going to say login. Otherwise, it's going to say register. And close that. And the reason I've done this is just because I want to provide the user the ability to switch between a login and a registration state. And so in here we can just say const is logging in and set is logging in equal to use state, and it's true initially. So if it's true, that means it's going to render, it should actually render the register button because we actually want to allow the user to switch to a registration page. And so we can just have that down here, and we can say on click is equal to function, and it's just going to be set is logging in to not is logging in. And I think I might have just made a spelling error, so I'll just make that like that. Is logging in. Perfect. And so that's just going to say register down there. I actually don't mind not having in all uppercase, so maybe I'll just go login like that. We also just want to give it some quick little styles, so we're going to say class is equal to duration 300, and we're just going to say hover scale 110, so like that. And so now when you hover over it like that, it will pop up. And the last thing we probably want to add is a cursor pointer. Cool, so now when you click register, it will switch to the login page. And consequently, we also want to change that text up here. So where this says login, I'm just going to say uppercase, and I'm going to use a similar thing to below. So is logging in, question mark. If it's true, then they say login. Otherwise it says register. So now on the registration page, then if we click login, that will change too. So that's pretty neat. So now that we have a fully fledged login page and registration page, I think it's just about time that we set up our Firebase product. So for that, what I'm going to do is go to Firebase and head over to their console. And so now that I'm logged in, it takes us to this project page, and we're going to want to add a project. And so I'm just going to call this Next To Do. We click continue. We don't need any of the analytics. We're going to let it create a project for us. Snap my fingers and it's done. Magic. Click continue, and now we come into here, and the first thing we're going to want to do is come into authentication and click get started. So while that provisions us an authentication system, we're just going to click email and password. We're going to want to enable that. You can optionally do an email link. We're just going to stick with the email password, and so that is now enabled, and that's pretty much it. So we have no users just yet, but we can go ahead and start using that. And the way that we will initialize that is by coming into Firestore. We're also just going to create a database while we're here, and we will start in test mode. Actually, no, we're going to start in production mode. You can use either and switch them around later. It doesn't really matter. And that's going to set us up a database for our project. And now that we have a database, we're just going to come into the rules section really quickly and just remove this logic just here. So it's just allow read and write. And so that's just going to be a totally open public database. So as long as no one gets your credentials, you're all good. So now that we have done that, we're going to have to initialize Firebase into our project, and we can do that by coming into the Firebase documentation, which will be linked in the description below. And we can just go add Firebase to your project. And so we're going to follow these instructions just here. And so the first one is going to be to go npm install Firebase. So if we come into our code, stop that and click npm install Firebase, that should be good. And while we're doing that, we're just going to create a file called firebase.javascript where all of our magic is going to happen. So now that that is installed, we're going to have to copy this code in just here. And so if I just paste that in straight away, then that gets us off to a nice start. And so this is the configuration file that we're going to have to come back and edit in a second. But for our project, we're also going to be using the authentication and the Firestore. So we're just going to say import get auth, just like that, from Firebase /auth. And we're going to have one more that's Firebase Firestore, and this is going to be called get Firestore. So just after this line down here, what we can do is we can say export const auth is equal to, and call our get auth and pass it in the app. Just like that. Why did that do that? Get auth, pass in the app. And likewise, we can just say export const database is equal to get Firestore and pass in the app too. So that's going to allow us to access our database from these modules anywhere throughout our document. So yeah, as I keep saying, we're going to have to find this configuration file. And so to do that, if we come into our settings and come down the bottom and click that, here we can see our apps. We're going to click on this web app just like this. We're going to call it Next To Do. And we're going to register that app. Now we've already followed all of this instruction, but we're going to copy this information just here and paste it into this document just here. Now, yeah, you can totally see these keys. You should not let anyone else see your keys. That's really important. And to prevent that, what we're going to do is go .env. It doesn't matter for this tutorial because I will be deleting this thingy McJiggy-bobby. But essentially we can see that our gitignore uses .env.local, so we can rename that to .local. And I already have this pre-prepared, so I'm just going to copy it across. And basically all I've done is I've initialized these keys, so all of them have to start with the prefix next public and then the key. And I've just copied all of these keys into the document just here. And so now what I can do is I can replace this with process.env. and then the name of the key, which is obviously going to be next_public _ API key, just like that. And so what I'm going to do is copy this and then select all of these, just like that. Swap them all out. Oh, I forgot one, silly me. And now we just have to update the name. So that instead of API key, this one is just going to be auth domain. This one will be project ID. This one is going to be storage bucket. And then here we have messaging sender ID. And lastly, we have app ID. And so this is just going to protect all of this information from people on the internet wanting to use it and landing you with a massive Firebase bill. So cool, that's our database all configured. And since we actually don't need this anymore, what I'm going to do is just use this specifically. So we can't open that up, but I can go npm run dev here. And it should provision all of this information here. Now, obviously we can see that somewhere in here I have a incorrect thing, which I can just search for, and we see that it is here. So instead pass a string cross origin is equal to true. So let's just do that. And then we'll restart it once more and see if that goes away. And look at that, it does. And now we have our working application working. Nice and neat. Perfect. Our registration page. And so we're good to create our authentication. So essentially for the authentication, how that's going to work is we're going to use a context. And so the context is going to get initialized just under here. So we'll say context. And in here, we're going to make a new file called auth context.javascript. Now we have a bit of code to write in here, but we're going to start off at the top by just saying import react, use context, use state, use effect, and use ref. So all of them, we're just going to say from React. And how the context is going to work is it's basically going to be a global state or a wrapper for our entire application that's just going to allow any page to access this authentication information. So after that, we're just going to say import auth, and we're going to import it from /Firebase, just like that. That's wrong, sorry, from /Firebase, and we're also going to import our database from there too. Then we're going to import some functions from Firebase authentication. So that's going to be sign in with email and password. We're going to say create user with email and password. And we're also going to say sign out. And we're going to have on auth state change. Now there's a bunch of other functions that you can use. For example, update password or send password reset email or any of those. And then the one last one that we're going to need is just going to be some Firebase Firestore functions, and so that's going to be doc and get doc, just like that, from Firebase/Firestore. Now, in here, we're just going to say const auth context is equal to react.create context and call that as a function. And then just in here, we're going to export a function called useAuth. And that is just going to return use context. And we're going to pass it the auth context. And this little export function just saves you having to do this logic in every component that you would like to access that context information. Finally, we're going to have export function auth provider. And in here, that's going to receive children. We'll open that up. And now we're going to need some state. So this is going to be current user set current user equal to use state null. We're also going to have a loading state, so loading and set loading equal to use state null. And then finally, we're going to have a const user info is equal to use ref, just like that. And that's going to store all of their to-dos in it. So it's going to be just once again another global state. Now in here, we're going to have a function called sign up. And this is going to take an email and a password, and it's going to call the method create user with email and password, path in the authentication, email and password. And then we're going to return. The next one is going to be function login. Once again, email, password, just like that. And this time we're going to return sign in with email, password, auth, email and password. Then we're going to have function log out, return sign out auth, just like that. And once again, you could go ahead and do this for all of the other functions like update password or anything that you might like, but I'm not going to stress it. And then lastly, what we're going to do is have a use effect just here. And this is going to run on page load. And basically, we're going to go const unsubscribe is equal to on auth state change. And so this is like a listener that listens into the authentication state. And to it, we provide the auth, and we're going to provide an asynchronous function that receives the user. And in here, we're going to do some stuff in a minute. And then after we've used that function, we're just going to return unsubscribe to tidy up. And yeah, that's all good. We'll see how this works in a minute. Actually, no, I guess we should probably do it now. And so how this on auth state change works is we're basically going to say, pretty simply, set current user equal to user. And lastly, set loading is equal to false. So I made a mistake here. That should say true. So loading is true until false. Exactly. So that's pretty neat. And so now that we've defined this use effect, the next thing we have to do for this context is just say const value is equal to, and we're just going to pass in the current user and all of these methods. So login, sign up, log out, and user info. And that's going to be value. And finally, we're going to return. And here we're going to go auth context.provider, and that's a capital P, provider, and we're going to pass in value is equal to value as props. And in here, we're just going to render out children if not loading. So if not loading, render out children, just like that, magic. So that is all good. Now the very last step with this context is to use it as a wrapper in our application. And so just in here, all we do is go auth provider and wrap our whole application in this auth provider. And we have effectively implemented a context. But it looks like I have an issue, and that's because I spelled that wrong. That should say changed, not change. So if I just update that. refresh that page, everything should be working. We should have that context available to us. And so we can come into our login component, for example, or even better into our, where is it, this index component just here, and we can call that by just saying const current user is equal to use auth, and we could console.log current user, and we'll see that we get null in our console. Perfect, absolutely. We get a double render because it's React strict mode, which is only for development. So that's excellent. Now, why don't we actually just register a user? So here, what we've got is a submit handler, and basically we're going to have logic dependent on whether or not it is logging in or isn't. So here I'm just going to say if is logging in. So if they're just logging in, what we're going to do is call that function. So here I'm going to say const login is equal to use auth, just like that. And I can just say login email and pass in the password just like that. Pretty straightforward. And I can say return that, for example. And now what I could do is just say otherwise they're not logged in and they're wanting to register. And so here I could just say the function was called sign up. So we can import sign up just like that. And now I can say sign up, email, password. Absolute magic. And so now if we come down into our application, we already have submit handler working. We should be able to check login. So let's try login. So if I just go banana@gmail.com, submit that, and now we get this big error, and that's because it doesn't exist, and so that's actually good. And it also makes me realize that this needs to be asynchronous because this method here needs to be awaited, as does this sign up method. So that is all good. The last thing we're actually going to do is also just come into here and say try and have a catch block. And essentially, we already have this error state. And so if there's an error, we're just going to say set error is incorrect email or password. And the try is just going to go on there. And so that's just going to handle that a bit better. And so if I do that again, so let's say we have banana@gmail.com, whatever random password, submit that, we get incorrect email or password showing up. But now if I were to register, submit that, we can check if current user changed and just console.log that here, current user. And so we can see that we have actually been logged in because now we have an active current user with all of this information just here. So the login system is actually working. Now that is excellent because it means that we can come into this index document and just say, we're checking for current user here. We can just say not current user, render login. Otherwise, we render out user. So if there is a current user, then we could just say user dashboard, for example. And we could make that component right now and just say new component, user dashboard.javascript RFC. Save that. Lastly, just import it. And so now the login screen is gone, and that is all well and good. So one thing that I don't currently like is the footer because I think it's just lying there. So one thing we're quickly going to do is just come in here and say class flex justify center items center gap 3. And in here, I'm just going to go to FontAwesome icons, and we're just going to take Instagram, just like that, paste that in there. We're also going to just take LinkedIn. And finally, oh no, didn't want that, back. GitHub, because why not? I actually think I prefer the little piggy. Paste that in, so that should look kind of cute. Just like that. Let's see how that looks. So now we have these three little icons. I'm just going to give them some py of 3. Cute. Now I'm also just going to go duration 300, hover opacity 30, and cursor pointer. Now, what I would recommend doing for these is putting them inside anchor tags. So in this particular case, what you would do is you would just go anchor like that, and you would say href is equal to whatever it was, you know, the link that you wanted to. You could say target is equal to underscore blank to open it up in a new page, but that will just redirect you to a new page. But now we can see that we have this little hover effect down the bottom. For our little icons, you could probably just increase the gap to maybe like 8. That's too much. 5. 5 looks good. A small little page. We've got our little icons, and finally we get to doing our user dashboard. I'll just zoom out. Let's go back to 100%. Cool. Actually, just before we do our user dashboard, the other thing I just want to quickly work on is how we could just include a super cool modal for logging out. Let's say you had a menu. And so in this particular case, what I'm going to do is just make a new file and call that modal.javascript. And in here, we're going to go rfc. And this is going to have a class of fixed width screen, height screen, inset of 0, background white, text slate 900. We're also going to say flex and flex col. And in here we're going to have a div that's class of flex items center justify between. This is going to have an h1 tag that just says menu. And then underneath, what we're going to do is once again come into here and just say close and take this little X mark and paste that in there like that. And we're also just going to say border solid border slate 900 and a padding of 4. And now underneath, what we're going to do is just have another div, secondary div, and this is also just going to have class of p for flex column, a gap of 3. And in here, you could just have any buttons. And so in this particular case, I only really have one for the minute, and that's just going to be log out. And how this modal is going to work is it's going to receive some props, and that's going to have const set open modal. Oh, can't spell that. Modal is equal to props. And we're going to define this in our header. So we're going to need state in here. Use state. And here we're just going to say const open modal and set open modal is equal to use state false. And we're going to use React fragments, pull this one right down to the very bottom. And in here, we're just going to say open modal, and we're going to render out the modal, just like that. We'll also just have to pass in set open modal is equal to set open modal. And the last thing we can do is open this modal on the icon click. So on click is equal to set open modal true, just like that. So now what we'll see is that when I come in here and click on this, we get this modal showing up, which, you know, it is what it is, exactly. It's not quite working 100% the way we want it to, but we'll see more about that in a second. So what comes next? Well, in this particular case, what we're actually going to do is render this slightly differently. And so down here, what we're going to have to do, well, actually first up the top, is just import React DOM from React DOM. And so that's just going to allow us to access the document object model, and we can use that by saying React DOM. Did I spell that correctly? React DOM. So it's actually React DOM, like that. Create portal. And how this portal works is the first argument is going to be all of our JSX, and then the second one is going to be _document.get element by ID, and we're just going to go portal. Now we'll see how that works in just a second, but first we just quickly have to define document, and so for that we're going to need some state. So we're going to say const _document set, and set _document is equal to use state null, and we're just going to have a use effect just in here, and that automatically imported just up there, just so you note. And this is going to run on page load, and basically this is just to prevent any fiddly handling, but we just set document on page load equal to the document, and if it's not _document, then we just want to return null. And the reason we do that is because of the way Next.js renders components. Sometimes the document doesn't exist when you go to use it down here, so this is just going to make sure that it does. And consequently, we can come into this thing here, and since I copied this code across, I already have this div available just here. But now what we can see is we have our portal, and so it's going to render it in this component. And we can see that our to-do list is down the bottom, and that is not how it should be. So essentially, and that's because I'm a complete and utter muppet, and this should actually be logic in a different component. So this should instead be used in the modal. So just like that, which means that we're also going to have to copy across this, paste that in there. We're going to have to copy across all of this logic, because I'm a silly egg. And we're just going to have to import use state and use effect. And lastly, this line just there. And this stuff just down here, this document just there. So we can just paste that back in. And so now if I save that again, this should be back the way it originally was, just like that. And now when I open up that, we can see that our modal shows up perfectly. We don't get any of the extra pages, and we should be able to click on close. So here, we're going to call the set open. We're going to say on click is equal to, and that's going to be set open modal false. So now we can close it, open it, close it, open it. You can also add some cool little hover effects. So in this particular case, you could say duration 300, hover, rotate 90. And so now we can see that if I come up here and do that, it does a little spin, which is kind of sweet. We're also going to say cursor pointer, and we're going to increase some font sizes. So this is going to be font extra bold. We're going to say text extra large. Maybe we could even go 2XL, because that still looks fine. And on small, we could say text 5 extra large. So now when we come onto a bigger screen, it gets nice and big. We get a huge little menu. We also want select, none, and we also want to make that larger. So here we can say text large, small, text 3XL. So that's probably pretty good. We've got our menu, and now on our logout, we actually just want to make sure that it does log out. So here we're going to say class name is once again select none. We could just say text, and here what we could do is actually just say text small, and on a small screen we could say text base. but maybe that's way too small. So I actually reckon we're going to say text base. Actually, we could say text large, and here we could just say text extra large. So it's just a bit bigger for our menu. And finally, we can say duration 300, hover, padding left is 2. And so what that'll do is it means that when we hover over it, it just comes out a little bit. It's kind of fun. And obviously a cursor pointer. Now you want to click it and log out, or you can close the page. So that's super sweet. And we could actually use that logout method. So we could just say const log out is equal to use auth, just here. Oh, wrong one. AUTH. And we can just say on click is equal to use auth. And so, no, it's not, is equal to log out. And so we can actually test this now. So when I click log out, we can see that our state is gone. And so we want to add some more stuff to this. So here what I'm going to do is actually just turn this into a function. So I'm actually just going to say log out, call that method, but also set open modal equal to false. Just like that. So now if I close that, we're logged out and our logout screen is rendering. And so now if I log back in, which I can't remember, but we can actually look by coming into here and going into authentication. We can see what the username was, although I've totally forgotten the password because I'm useless. So in this particular case, I'm actually just going to create a new user, register banna@gmail, if I can spell, .com, 1 2 3 4 5 6, submit. We're logged in. We can come into the menu, we can log out, and we can consequently log back in. So that's really cool. We actually have a fully functioning site now. The last thing to do is do the user dashboard and the database. So let's dive into that. Basically how that's going to work is we're going to want to give them a to-do layout. And the way that I'm thinking we do it is if we come in here, I created this user dashboard component. And so we can just say class name is width full, max width it's going to be 65 characters, and MX is auto so that it's always centered. We're also going to say flex col gap 3, and then on a small we're going to say gap 5. Now in here what we're going to do is say const user info is equal to use auth. We'll have to import that. And so that's just going to provide us any user info that we might have. And so if we don't have any user info, then we're going to render some stuff. Otherwise, we're just going to render a button. And so the way that we can do that is just use curly braces. Sorry if that didn't make a whole lot of sense what I just said, but you'll see in a second. So we take the curly braces like this, and we're just going to say user info and this stuff here. So that's just going to ensure that user info is not null. And in here we'll render out all of our to-dos in a moment. But beneath that we're going to have a button which is going to have class of, let's say background cyan 300, text slate 900, padding wive 2, we could just, and text center, and in here we can just say add to do, and I might just make that uppercase, and let's say font medium for boldness, and in this whole page we just want to say text is extra small, but then on a small screen text is small, and this can be text large. So now we have a button here. And how this button is going to work is we're going to give it a duration of 300, a hover effect of opacity 30, and I'm actually going to change this. So I'm going to keep the text I'm going to change this to text cyan, and instead of having the background, I'm just going to say border solid border cyan 300. So now it's just going to look like that, which is I think a better looking button. We could even actually probably just get rid of this font medium. So that's kind of cute. So now we can add a to-do. What we want to display up here is a place for them to have an input. So we'll need some state for that. So we can just have use state const add to-do set add to-do. And that's equal to use state. Initially it's going to be false. And then the second one we're going to say const to do set to do is equal to use state, and that's just going to be an empty string. So in here above all of our to-dos, what we can do is we can just have an input, and the type is going to be equal to text, and the placeholder is equal to enter to do. And the value is going to be equal to do, and on change is equal to, we have to get the event, and we're going to set to do equal to e.target.value, so the value of that input. And finally, we're just going to give it a class name equal to outline none, padding 2. And honestly, that should just about do it. So let's see what that looks like. So here we have our to-do. I might just make the font size a little bit bigger. So we're going to say text base, and then small text is large. And so now if we come onto a bigger screen, that's how it looks. And so in here we can enter our to-do. We're going to have to change the text color, 900. And I might actually just make that 3. So it's a nice big box where you can enter whatever to-do you might have. Now, what I am going to do is just put this inside of a div. So this is going to have class of flex and items stretch. And the input is going to go first, but after the input, we're going to have a button that has class of width fit, padding x of 4, small, padding x of maybe 6, padding y of 2, small, padding y of 3. And that's going to have a background of amber 400, text white. And in here, we're just going to have an add button. And so what that's going to do is it's just going to sit there like that. I might just make it font medium text base. How does that look? That's not too bad. And then in here, what you can do is to the input, you can just say flex 1, and now it's going to push out to expand the whole thing. And so this little add button, the way it's going to work is when we're entering a to-do, we're going to be able to select add at the end of it. And so for that, we're obviously going to want to add a hover effect. So we need to go duration 300, hover opacity 40. So now when we hover, it goes a bit dark. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I don't want to show this button if the add to do is on. So if add to do is true, then we don't want to show it. So we're going to inverse that logic just like that. So now that if I refresh this page and wrap this add to do section in that, because we only want to show it when we have it. So add to do, and now what's going to happen is we don't have any to-dos, but if I click add, it should do it, but it won't. So on click equals set add to do true. Add that on click handler, I click it, it gives us the ability to add this to do. Now the last thing we're going to do is just have a use effect that changes on user info. And it says if not user info, then basically, actually no, let's say if user info exists, and because it's going to be probably an object, so let's say object.keys, user info dot length is equal to 0, then we actually want to set add to do to true, so that when I refresh the page, if user info, well, actually even better, let's say if not user info and object.keys. So now when I refresh the page, well, essentially what this will do later is it will just set that to automatically true. But yeah, so that's pretty cool. Now we have our little to-do that we can add. The next thing we're just going to have to do is actually persist it. And so for that, what we're going to do is have some state. And so the way the state will work is we'll just say const to-do list set to-do list is equal to use state null. Actually, let's just go for an empty array, just like that. And just let me check something. And while we're at it, we can actually just delete this API folder here. We don't need it. And so the next thing is that when they add a to-do, we're going to want to handle that. So we're going to make a function. It's going to be an asynchronous function. Async function handle add to-do. Open that up. And in here, what we're going to do is just say set to-do list, and we're going to set an object and spread the current to-do list, and what we're going to do is create a key that is the maximum of all the current keys. So we're going to say object, well, it's actually going to be math.max object.keys, can I spell keys to-do list, and then to that we're going to add 1, so it's always a new and larger key. And then the value is going to be whatever the current state of to-do is. So that should add a to-do. We're obviously just going to add a clause that says if not to-do, then we just want to return because we don't want them to be adding invalid to-dos. And so now what we can do is just assign that to this add button here, and we can say onClick is equal to handle add to-do. And so now I should be able to say, let's actually just console.log to-do list, just like that. And so now when I say James is cool and click add, we can see that negative infinity is giving us James is cool. And so that is problematic. Math.math. So to-do list needs to be changed to an object, I think is the first thing. So let's refresh that page and do that again. So add to do, banana. Okay, infinity. So the last thing we're going to do is just have a variable here to make it a bit clearer. So we'll say const new key is equal to, abstract all of this, and just say or 1. So if that doesn't exist, it's just going to set it to 1, otherwise it'll do it. So let's try that. New key, refresh. Add to do, still infinity. So I guess we're going to have to be a bit smarter and just say, since there's technically no keys, we'll just say object.keys.to-do list.length equals 0. If it equals 0, then we'll just return 1, otherwise we'll return that. So I think it's probably going to be the most robust way to do that. So let's once again refresh that page, add a to-do, and we can see that the key is 1. And so for that, what we're going to do is in here, this is where we're going to map them all out. And so now we can say object.keys to-do list dot map, and we can just say to do take an index, and we can return just a div for the minute that has that to do. Now when you return a map, you also have to say that the key is equal to the index. And so now we can see that it's actually rendering out the to-do, whereas what we actually want to do is have the to-do list and take the value at that key. And so now ASD renders, which is just what we wanted. And so this is going to have some styling of its own, and so we could just make a new component, and so we're going to say to do card.javascript rfc, And I'm actually just going to probably, so this is going to have props. And let's just say const children is equal to props. And in here, we can just render out the children content like that. I think is going to be the best way. And so I can just change this to do card. Just like that. So now if I refresh that page, add a to-do, banana is our to-do, and it pops up. So that's perfect. Now in our to-do card, we can give that some styling. So we're going to say class is padding 2, border white, border solid, so that we get a nice little border around it. And here we're going to have a div, and this is going to have a class of flex1, because this is going to have a class of flex and items stretch, just like that. Now we want the content to have a class of flex1, so it occupies most of the space, and then after that we're going to have another div with some functionalities like delete and stuff like that later. And so in here we're going to have 2 icons. The first one is going to be delete. Let's see what comes up. So I think we more specifically want a trash can. So if I come in here, we can open this up and we can have the trash can, swap out the class for class name. And then the other one is going to be pencil, which is just going to be to edit, just like that. So in here, if they want to edit it, they have the opportunity to. And so I'm once again just going to give this a class of flex and a gap. Yeah, just a class of flex. So now we can see here we have our 2 icons. I might just say items center, so that they're nice and centered. And then for each of them, I'm just going to give them a padding x of 2, px of 2, just like that. So they sit down the end, which is super sweet. We're also going to say duration 300. For the pencil that we have, the hover effect is going to be a rotate 45. And for the trash, we're going to say duration 300, hover scale 110. So hover over that or that. You could probably even go 125 for the trash can. Yeah, so it jumps out at you. And now we could also just do cursor pointer on the 2 of them. Cool, and so that actually looks really cute. We have a nice and neat little to-do list that we can copy, and we'll be able to edit it soon. So now when we add that to-do, I actually think I prefer this than having the button, to be honest. So honestly, what we could do is just have this as a permanent add feature and have all of our to-dos listed down below. So I might come in here and for now just comment that out, and we can just make this a permanent addition, just like that. So you can always do it, and it also means that we can actually just comment that out for the minute too. So now this is just always going to be there. So I could say buy bananas, add it, and my to-do list shows up. Other neat things you can do is we can just come back in here, and just for this we can just say capitalize. Just probably not actually, because it will do it for all of them, but just like that I think is pretty good. And the last thing I might just do is just say small p3, make it a bit bigger. So now if I said aloha, it adds a second to do, and then it also makes me realize that when we add a to-do, we also just want to set the to-do to the original state, which is the empty string. So set to-do to empty string. So now when I add, let's say we have pick up James from school, we add that, it enters it, and it's all good. How does it look on a mobile device? Looks nice and neat, very tidy, excellent, can't complain. We have our nice little logout screen, our little header, our little icons. The last thing to do is to persist it to a database. And that is actually relatively straightforward. the first thing we're going to have to do is just come into our database and we're going to start a collection called users. Now in here, I'm just going to create a random one called master for the second, but that is just going to look like that. So how this is going to work is if we come into our user dashboard, we're going to need some logic to write some information. And so the logic that we're going to need in this component is import doc set doc, just like that, equal from Firebase/Firestore. And we're also going to have to import our database, so import db from /Firebase, just like that. And so now what we can do is when we do this handling add to do thing, we can just persist that to our database as well. And so in here we can just say const user ref is equal to doc, we pass the db, we select the users field, and in here we're going to say current user.uid, and then the next thing we're going to do is say await set document. We'll pass it the user ref, just like that, and now we're going to open up an object, and in here we're going to have to-dos, for example, just like that. To-dos is going to just be the exact same thing we set it to here, so it's just going to be new key and to-do magic, except the one last property we're going to have to pass in is merge is true. Otherwise what it would do is overwrite our document completely, and that is not what we want. And so now if we come back into our app and I say James is cool and add that, we get an error because current user is not defined. And so we have to import current user, just like that, and we'll see that if we come up here, if I can find it, I think I stopped consoling it, but basically this user has an associated UID with their name, and so when I add a to-do, James is cool, and if we come into our Firebase, we can see that we have this document here and we have James is cool. And so it's super convenient. This is the user ID, and so it will just, if I add another one, let's say for example, buy bananas, click add, it's been added to our to-do and it's merged them together. So that is literally our data persistence. The very last thing we have to do is, obviously if I refresh the page, the to-dos are still gone, you know, so I have to somehow pull them in on page load. Now there's two ways you could do this. The way that we're going to do it is with React hooks. So I'm going to make a new file called hooks, and inside here I'm just going to have a file called fetch todos.javascript, and in here we're going to create a component and it's going to be called use fetch todos. Now for it we're going to need React use state, use effect, and use ref. And we're also going to need some Firebase functions, so we're going to have import doc and get doc from Firebase/Firestore. And so now that we have them, we'll also need import. We can do that later. Okay, so now that we have them, we're going to have to define some variables just here. So we're going to have const loading set loading is equal to useState true. For the default state, we're going to have const error set error is equal to useState null, and finally we're going to have const todos set todos is equal to useState, just like that, and that will also be null. So down here what we're going to do is, instead of returning that, we're actually just going to return an object that has loading error and to-dos, just like that, magic. And in here what we're going to do is write a use effect that runs on page load, so we can pass it and empty a dependency array. And we can define a function, so we're going to say function fetch data. It's an asynchronous function. And in here, we're going to have a try block. And this is going to say const docref is equal to doc, pass in the database, select users, and select current ID current user dot UID. So we'll need our current user. So that would be const current user is equal to use auth, just like that. And then in here we can have a catch, just quickly, error, and a finally. But after we have this doc ID, the next thing we're going to do is say const doc snap is equal to await get doc, and we pass it the doc ref, just like that. And so now what we can say is if doc snap dot exists and call that method, then we could just say console.log doc snap dot data and call that method too. And I also just want to say if doc snap dot exists. I forget which method it is, so I'll just say console.log. Oopsie. So now if we catch an error, we're obviously going to want to set error equal to true. Or we could be more specific and say failed to load to-dos. And then finally we can set loading equal to false. And so in this block here, we're just going to run that fetch data function. And now in our user dashboard, we can call that in here. So if we come down, well, actually, let's do it up the top. We'll say const to-dos loading error is equal to use fetch to-dos, and run that just like that. So now obviously nothing happens, but if I go console.log to-dos, we get nothing back. So let's just check that this is running. If I console.log banana, so banana is running. And so we can see that when I run that, if I add a console.log of the error in here, that I'm actually getting an error. And it's telling me that database is not defined, and that's because we have to import db from .firebase. And so now when I reload this, we actually get our to-dos coming out. So that's super cool. And so in here, what I can do is I can say, well, first we know that this has worked adequately. And so I can say set to-dos is equal to docsnap.data, call that method .todos. And so now we have our to-dos just there, so that's super neat. So I can remove all these console.logs. That can go, where's the other one? That's one, that's two. I have to move that into there just like that, and so I can remove that. Cool. And now in here, I can actually remove this to-do list object and just go off to-dos instead. So down here where I map them all out, it's just going to be to-dos. To-dos.map cannot defer. Okay, and so the one other thing is that obviously it's going to have to be user info and not loading. So the last thing we have to change is swap that out, just like that, refresh the page, it loads. And so what you could do is you could say, you know, if we have user info and loading, and we could have just like a div and just have a tiny little loading state. So, you know, we could open this up onto a new tab, and in here we could have like, let's say an atom, or, you know, what's Thinking, I wonder if they have a brain. Thinking, time, tap, loading. What do they have for loading? Spinner. So let's just do this. We'll copy that in, give it an adequate class name, and we can just say animate spin in here. And what that will do is when we're loading this, let's actually also just say this will have a class flex1. So now when I refresh the app, we get that tiny little loading symbol. So in this particular case, what I just want to say is we need to, so that's flex col. Let's just make that a flex1 so that it occupies the whole space. Now when I refresh that, that's there. Yeah, I mean, what we could just say flex or grid place items center. Let's see if that works. Yeah, so you can see that tiny little loading icon. I could even make it bigger, so I could say text 6 extra large. Refresh, we get the loading, that shows up, it's all good. Same thing here, loading icon, to-dos have loaded. And so just like that, you actually have a super functional to-do app. The last thing is obviously to edit and delete them. And so for that, what we're going to do is just say, we'll use another state. So I could change this to edit, set edit as useState false. And so in this particular case, we could say, we can pass that into the card because that's where the thing is. So set edit is equal to true. Sorry, set edit is equal to set edit. And we'll also say edit is equal to edit. And so what that will allow us to do is that we can come into our to-do card, and on this particular click, we can, no, sorry, that's the delete, it'll be this one. On click is equal to set edit equal to true. So we can have that in here, so that'll be edit, set edit, edit and set edit. And now when I click that, it will set edit to true. But what we actually want to do is make this whole thing relative. And what we're going to have up here is just edit. And we're going to have a special div that when it's true, well, actually, even better, what we could do is we could just say, instead of rendering out the children, we could make that an optional render. So watch this. So when I say, I will say edit, if edit is false, so we'll say check, if edit is false, then we're going to render out children, just like that. Otherwise, and we can open that up onto a new line, we're going to have an input that has a class of bg, let's say inherit, text white, just like that. We'll say p2 placeholder. Well, actually, we can just set the value equal to the current children content, and we can have the edited value, set edited value, just like that, I think. Yeah, just like that. And so now what we can do is actually change that. So that's going to be edited value, and we can say on change is equal to take the event set edited value e.target.value. So what this is going to allow us to do is, we'll see in 1 second, but what I'm going to do for the minute is just say, yeah, actually that should be fine. Text white. I don't know that I even need to add that padding, but we will need an outline of none. So that's put it as James is cool. Why has it done that? Edit children flex1. So if I refresh that page, it loads our to-dos. James is cool, James is cool. We have to comment that out. And now when I click edit, it displays both of them. But the thing is that we only want to actually set it to a particular thing. And so if we come into our user dashboard, edit needs to be a truth statement. And so what we're going to do is when we set edit, we're going to have to pass in the index. So that's going to be the index is equal to I. And so now in our to-do card, if we receive the index, so when we click on an edit button, we're actually going to make a change. So we're not going to set that to true. We're instead going to set it to the index. So we do indeed have to pass down the index, just like that. So if I come in here and I just say index is equal to I, but the edit parameter is actually going to be, so let's just change that to edit bool is equal to edit is equal to the current I, just like that. So basically what will happen is it will only display it on one of them. So in this particular case, if I do that, well, that didn't really work, did it? So I can close that set edit index. Let's just console.log index 0011. Okay, so I'm actually just going to rechange it. So set edit is going to be a variable. So we've initially got it set to null is what I want it to. If we're editing it, then I want to set it to the to-do. So set edit, I'm actually going to just create a handler up here. So I'm going to say function handle add edit. And this is going to say, it's going to take an element. So it's going to take the to-do index or the to-do key. And I'm going to return set edit equal to that to-do key, just like that. And that's going to be inside a curried function. So that's going to handle the edit. And so I can call that handle add edit is equal to handle add edit. Now the next thing is we don't need that. So we do need an edit. So edit is going to be equal to edit. And so that's going to be the index. And so the final thing we're going to have the bool is equal to, and so we're just going to also have the to-do key. And so that's going to just be like this. And so essentially in our to-do card, if I just change this to the to-do key, which I should realistically call it more properly, to-do key just there. Didn't like that, did it? To-do key is equal to to-do. That should fix that. And so now we receive the to-do key. And so basically instead this is just going to be if the edit is equal to the to-do key, then it replaces it. So let's see what's happening there. Index is not defined. Where are we? Get rid of that. So now when I refresh this page, it pulls the information in. We click edit, index is not defined. Where do I have index? Set edit. It'll be this one, I think. Line 16, yep. So that's going to be to-do key. So now when I click edit, set edit is not defined. Do I pass in a set edit? No, I do not. Okay, so it's instead handle add edit. So that gets changed. Handle edit, and that is going to be just handle edit with the to-do key, just like that. Let's try that. So now that's actually working. So we have an input here that we can do, but set edited value doesn't exist yet. So in our main dashboard, we can just add that in. So we can say const edited value set edited value is equal to use state nothing. And so what we're going to do is when we set the edited value, I'm actually going to add in something here. So not only are we going to set the edit true, but we're going to set it to the current state. So we're going to set edited value equal to to-dos for that to-do key. And so just like that, when I click that, it didn't show up, but I think the reason is because in here I'm going to have to change Nope, that value is correct. Text white. Let me just refresh that page. Let's try consoling edited value. So edited value is undefined. So for some reason that didn't work. To-dos, to-do key, set edit. So that seemed to work. That was line 41. So if I just try console, the reason is because I wasn't actually passing down edited value, so we have to add that in here is equal to edited value. So now when I click on that, that all works, and I also have to pass down set edited value equals set edited value. So yeah, that basically should do the trick. Let's try that once more. So I refresh the page, console.log that. So now it's actually an input box that I can add to. And the last thing I'm going to do is change that to a tick. Just like this. So if the tick is displayed, I'm actually just going to have some conditional logic here that just says edit. Well, in this particular case, it's going to be edit equals to-do key, question mark, it's going to be this or that. So let's just try saving that. So now when we edit, we can see that we get that little tick, which is kind of cute. I'm just going to copy some of the styling, so probably the same stuff as just here. Just like that. Paste that in there. So now we have the little tick. And then on the tick, what I'm going to do is just have a handle resubmit function, which I'm actually going to paste into here because we already have all the relevant functions. So this is handle add to do. We're going to have handle edit to do, which is just going to have the same function or same content. Have to define it as a function and make it asynchronous. And so if edit, or I guess it's edited value, right, is not, then it just returns. Otherwise, what it's going to do is not generate a new key. It will set edited value and set edited to null again. And we're going to, instead of having a new key, we already have the key. So that's going to be const new key is equal to edit. And that should actually just overwrite it. And so now if I save all of that, let's say I click this tick. Currently for here, it just says James is cool. But if I click tick, nothing happened. And that's because I haven't assigned the function. And so now if I just pass this function down in here, so we're going to have handle edit to do's as that. Import it in here. And we can just say on click with this particular one here. So this on click is equal to and pass in that function. And so now when I click on it, we get set to do list is not defined. And that's because it doesn't actually exist. And honestly, we do need it to do's. So we'll also have to have set to do's and use fetch tools. So we can just get that really quickly by going into our hook and making sure that that gets passed down as well. Set to do's. Oh, that was the wrong one. So we pass that down. We update to do's. Set to do's is here, just like that. We change that new key, and that just saves us having to refetch all of the information. So now I can edit this. It's now an edit field. I can say banana. Click OK. Set to-do list is still not working, and that's because that needs to be set to-dos. I thought I changed that. I guess both of them have to be. Okay. So let's try that once more. Sorry, that was a bit chaotic. The other thing we just have to make sure is that if we do have this input, that the flex is still 1. so that it takes up the maximum amount of space, because currently it's only when I click over here. Input flex is 1, flex 1, so that should just be flex. So now we click off, we click anywhere. So now I say, click the tick, to-do list is not defined. Still got a couple more things to resolve, so that's just going to be actually to-dos. And this one is also going to be to-dos. Let's try that once more. So if I tick, did it update in the store? It set it to an empty string, and that's probably because I'm a muppet, and I'm actually setting these values to nothing before I do all of it. So what we want to do is paste it down here. You could have this one work first and then do the rest of it, but you definitely want to make sure that this logic is beneath. Just like that, especially this bottom line, because we have to make sure that we still have the to-do accessible. Okay, so now we refresh our page. Let's change this to banana update. Come back into our application, edit that, add some stuff, click tick, it goes away because why is it going away? It's no longer an input value. If we come back into the store, it's still setting it to an empty string, and that's because it's to do, which is an empty string, whereas it should actually be edited value. Just like that. So let's try this once more. So that's ASD, we refresh our page, we edit it, ASD, ASD, we click tick, and now it's updated, and we refresh our page, and that is persisted. And then the very last thing is the button. And so for the delete button, that's actually super simple. All we have to do is come up to here and input delete field and pass that. Well, actually we can just have a function, so we can say function handle delete. It takes a to-do key, just like the rest of them. It's an asynchronous function. And in here, what we want to do is return an arrow function that first removes it from to-dos. So it's just going to be to delete to-dos dot whatever index it was, I guess is to-do key. So that's going to remove it from here. And then the second thing we want to do is copy this logic once again. So just like that, take the user, get the to-dos, have the key, and the key is going to be to-do key, and we just want to go delete field and call that as a function, just like that. So now once again we can pass this down into our little component here by just saying handle delete is handle delete. Await isn't allowed inside of a, sorry, this needs to be the async. Just like that. And then we've passed that into our to-do card. We can receive it in here, so we're just going to say handle delete. And then we can call this method on this icon here, so we can just say onClick is equal to handle delete and pass it in the to-do key. Magic. And so now when I run that, to-do key, onClick is expecting a delete. And so now when I do that, we can see that it's actually removed them both from my to-do list, which is now an empty object. So if I refresh the page, it's all gone. If I say banana, it adds them all back. Handle add. Sorry, I just need to fix this one last thing. So in here, we're still doing set to-dos, add to-do. That should be to-dos. That should also be to-dos. To-dos, 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 to-dos. Cool, so that's all resolved. Let's add that back in. Add, so we have banana, it's back in the database. But now for the delete, we need to make sure that it is updating our new thing. And so the one thing it's not doing is we can't actually do that because it's a state. So instead we just have to say const temp object is equal to to-dos. And then in here we can run this method on temp object. And then finally what we can do is set to-dos temp object. And that should just eliminate that key from our object. So now if I say James is cool, we can add that. And then if I delete bananas, bananas is indeed deleted from here, but for some reason it's not wanting to go out from there. So I think maybe instead if I try spread it like that, it might work. Let's try that. So if I delete that, okay, so that actually worked. That was perfect. Just because I'm a Muppet and I missed this in the video, James, and just like that. And so now we have full CRUD. Oh, banana. Save that. Banana's updated. Yeah, so that's pretty much our whole application, just all done magic like that. You can do whatever you want. Two small things you'll want to just change is here, this should just be loading, whereas currently it'll have user info and loading is the first one. And then the second one is in the fetch to-do list. You'll also want to just add this tiny little else block afterwards to this doc-snap. But other than that, you should be sweet. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please like and subscribe. I super appreciate it. And I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace out.